Hello, this is Tales of Dread. Tonight, we'll tell you some UFO stories. So have fun, but don't forget to click like, share, and subscribe. They go through the wall. I don't know how they do it, but that's where they start. They walk out of the dining room wall in the middle of my apartment. I could hear the sound of their feet. They are walking across my floor. Some parts of the floor creak when little feet walk across the carpet as they head toward my bedroom. I didn't want to go to sleep, but I couldn't fight the wave of exhaustion that was coming over me. As the footsteps get closer, I can't sleep because they always knock something off my art table, which is next to my door. I didn't expect them to be so clumsy. Most of the time, the footsteps are quiet, but I could hear them a bit better now. They are at the foot of my bed in my room. I'm free to move, but I don't want to. I'd rather not look. I go to sleep as soon as I hear the last step. When I wake up in the morning, I feel like I just had the best sleep of my life. That's how it always goes. I hadn't forgotten these memories, but I'd never thought about them in this way before. When things don't make sense, it's hard to figure out what they mean. When things are like that, I don't always know what to think about them, so I just put them away until I can figure them out. That seems to be the case for a few memories that came back to me soon after my trip started because I knew what they were about. The first thing that came to mind was when I saw a clear UFO. I was in a friend's car as a passenger, and another friend was in the back seat. It was about 10 p.m., and we were driving north on Highway 3 in Houston, Texas. Ryan was in the back seat, texting on his flip phone, which was new technology at the time. I think it happened either in 2005 or 2004, but if I'm wrong, please forgive me. The driver, who I'll call Bob, was listening to music loudly, and we were all thinking to ourselves as he drove with no real destination in mind. I had a strange feeling like I needed to look up. I'm not sure why. I rolled down the window and looked up into the night sky, not expecting to see the huge craft above us. I was blown away. There were 3 white lights that made a big triangle, and in the middle of the triangle was the darkest black color. You might think that the stars would go away inside the triangle and then show up again behind it. It was clearly following us because the end of it was pointed in the direction we were going. It was right on top of us and going the same speed as us, which was about 55 mph. The ship itself was very big, and I guessed that it was at least 100 feet long from one end to the other. It was moving silently and too slowly to be a plane or jet. We were used to jets roaring by because we were close to a former airbase, which still hosted many aft jets. This wasn't one of them at all. I put my head back in the car and tried like hell to get my friends to look at it. Ryan wasn't driving, so I asked him first. He just kept looking at his phone and said, "No, I'm not going to do that." I tried even harder to get one of them to look up and see that there was a UFO right above us. This is probably a chance that will never come up again. It's right there. You just have to look. Bob turned up the radio all the way and laughed as if I were full of crap. Ryan ignored me. I stuck my head back out the window and looked up at the craft that was still following us. I start to think of words to say to it. I think I said something like, "What are you guys doing up there?" in the millisecond between thinking and speaking, as if it were responding to what I was thinking before I could say a word. It took off at an amazing speed toward the horizon and didn't make a sound. Bob could have turned up his crappy standard car stereo, but it wouldn't have been able to cover up the sound of a jet. I thought that the sighting was because we were near an Air Force base, and that the plane was probably a top secret one. I didn't think there might have been another reason until I started going there. It was after us, in the end. A few weeks later, I went to visit Bob at his apartment and saw that his forearm was bleeding. Ryan was sitting on his bed again, texting on his phone. Bob took a Zippo lighter to his arm, which made me finally ask him what was wrong. He said that a bump had formed on his arm, and he didn't like it. He used a knife to cut it out, but it grew back. This time, he cut it out and burned the area. I thought it was very strange, but he was a pretty crazy person, so I left it alone. Later that day, I was rubbing my left forearm and saw that I had a bump in the same place as Bob's. I almost asked Ryan if he had one as well. It didn't hurt or do anything weird. It was like B-Bay was wrapped in a thin layer of cartilage and right under all of my skin layers. Ryan said he didn't have a bump on his head. I told him I didn't know I had one until just then, so he should probably check. Since he was too busy with his phone to notice, I grabbed his left forearm and felt for a bump. He had one too, and it was in the same place as Bob's. But Ryan being Ryan, he didn't care. That's just how he is. Another memory also made more sense after I went there, and I'll tell you about it soon. If a highly advanced and smart species comes to visit you in the middle of the night, you might start to think you're going crazy. I'm pretty sure that all of us have thought about it, even though it's a taboo subject. I was no different. I started dating a woman from the other side of the city in 2009. She shared a house with another person, so it was easier for us to get close when she drove to my place. When my son was staying with his mother, she would often stay the night, and we did all the fun things that couples do. We were making breakfast in the kitchen on a weekend morning when I noticed a long, deep scratch on my arm that hadn't been there before. We did not drink, so there was no way I could have cut myself that badly and not noticed or remembered it. She also didn't know what it was. We didn't think much of it, though. It was weird. We hung out all day, made art, and went back to bed that night. I hadn't told her other visitors yet, but they don't seem to care about other people in my life, so I wasn't worried. The next morning when we woke up, I felt on top of the world. We found out that the scratch on my arm was gone while making breakfast again. Not a trace, no scab, no scar. It was like nothing had happened. It was strange, but we didn't think much of it. 2 weeks later, she came back to spend the weekend with me. The first night, we didn't feel like messing around. So, before going to sleep, we lay in my bed and looked at the ceiling while talking. Suddenly, a bright blue light came in through my window and shone right on the wall in front of us. She was interested and asked what that light was. Before we both fell asleep right away, I remember saying that it was probably just one of my fans. The next morning, we were both very rested. I always asked her how she slept in the morning. The usual answer was that she had trouble sleeping because of my snoring, which made me feel bad most mornings. She was nice about it, but she was always honest. This morning, though she said she had slept better than she ever had in her life, this statement made me feel very sad and saddened me. After we had brushed our teeth and made up for what happened the night before, don't force me to explain, we were both smoking cigarettes on the front porch, and I was looking out the window of my bedroom. I live on the second floor, and in front of my window is a big, thick magnolia tree. I remember the light, and based on how it was angled, it had to be about 15 feet above the ground and between my window and the magnolia tree. I also let her know about these things. She thought it was very strange and asked who you were talking about when you talked about your fans the night before. Later that night, I realized I didn't know why I'd said that. I decided to tell her about my guests, which, as I've said before, didn't scare her away. Some events are so strange that I haven't made up my mind about them yet. I've had experiences that didn't make enough sense for me to understand, and I couldn't remember anything that would help me understand them after my visits. But after a while, some of them started to make sense. This happened around 1998, and my longtime friend Ryan was also there. Around 8 o'clock at night, we were hanging out at a friend's apartment and playing video games. Everybody got hungry. Ryan and I volunteered to go to the nearby Jack in the Box to get everyone's food. It was only a block away. We took a huge order on paper, which was the norm at the time, and left in his car to get food. When we got to the drive-thru, we told the person taking the order that it was for 6 people and would be a very big order. They took our order and told us to wait in our car in the parking lot. After about 8 minutes, they brought us our food. We drove to a gas station to buy cigarettes and then went straight back to our apartment. We thought the whole run took about 20 minutes. But when we got back, everyone was freaking out and asking, "Where the heck are you guys? Where did you go?" When they asked why it was taking so long, I said something like, "It was a big order, and we told you it would take a while." They said we'd been gone for almost 2 hours. Ryan and I couldn't believe it. We thought they were playing a joke on us. They said that they had called the local police, jails, and hospitals because they were really worried that we had died or been arrested or something. They didn't convince me. When I looked at the microwave's clock, I saw that we had been gone for about an hour and a half. I still didn't believe it. The time on our friend's watch was the same as ours. Ryan and I still thought that they were playing a joke on us by changing the clocks. Then I remembered that Ryan's car had a clock in it, but they didn't have a key. "Hey Ryan, go look at the clock in your car to find out what time it is." I said that when he came back, he had a sad look on his face and pointed to the time on the microwave. He said, "That's the right time now." I thought he was in on the joke, even though he wasn't usually the type to do something like that. I told him I had to see for myself, so he took me to his car. The time was right, and it stayed right as the night went on. They did not lie. I thought it was weird that the food was still hot when we got there. After an hour, fast food gets a bit thicker and changes texture, but this didn't happen. I too didn't know what to think. So I put it out of my mind until about 2010, when things finally started to make sense. My family spent Thanksgiving with my brother-in-law in Texas. In 2012, my son, mother, grandfather and I got into my mother's truck and drove out to the middle of nowhere. When we got to my brother's remote home, I thought this would be the perfect place for them to come get me tonight. I didn't think they would really do it. We got there on Thanksgiving Day and did what families do. As it was almost time for bed, we figured out who everyone was and made plans. That night, there were 12 people staying there. They were all different ages. It would be an understatement to say that the scene was chaotic because there was a baby, a toddler, some school-aged kids, a few middle-aged adults, and 2 older people. We'd been there before, so we knew what to expect. I knew that everyone would never all be asleep at the same time. I chose to stay up all night because I wanted to draw all night. When I came back inside from smoking on the porch, everyone was already asleep. As I walked on the old floor, it creaked, and I started to feel bad that I might be keeping people away. I finally gave up and went to sleep. I laid down in the guest bed and fell asleep right away. I had a very strange and detailed dream that night. I was the first one to wake up, so I went outside to smoke a cigarette and think about the dream, which was still fresh in my mind. I could remember every detail, but I didn't think much of it. It was all in my head. I thought I was sitting in a chair in a dark room in the dream. I could hear 2 beings behind me talking about what I was doing at the console in front of me. There were some strange controls in front of me that I could use with my hands. The display for this device was projected directly into my mind, almost like seeing it in virtual reality, like playing a game. I was telling everyone in my brother's house what to do and how to talk. I also made sure that everyone used the bathroom, showered, and brushed their teeth in a polite way by taking turns. I also programmed my own actions, like the things I would say to everyone. Every time I avoided a fight, I heard a sound like I had done well in a video game. I was avoiding conflict and bad feelings at every turn, making sure that everyone's actions were well planned and that everyone's needs were met. At the end of the story, my son, my mum, and my grandpa all got into my mum's truck and drove away. After it was finished, in the dark room, I saw the console again for the second time. The 2 people behind me, whom I didn't bother to look at, kept talking about how well I did. I went inside and thought about all of this. Then it started, and the symphony of harmony I had planned the night before happened just as I had planned. Everyone said what I had programmed them to say. They ate what I made, and even what I had programmed them to eat. As my son walked by me with a peanut butter sandwich, it became clear that the dream was coming true. Their dialogue matched the dream so closely that I started to freak out. Every move, including mine, was planned out in my mind. I was yelling, "Holy cow! This is happening!" I can't tell anyone because then they'd think I'm crazy for sticking to the plan. Just follow the plan. As I sat there thinking, my brother's wife came over and asked me a question. I didn't want to follow the plan. I wanted to scream, freak out, and run out of the house yelling as loud as I could. But I kept my cool on the outside. I answered as I had planned, and all 11 of us used the bathroom. 8 of us watched my son play with his early birthday present in the front yard, while a few of us looked on. It was a remote-controlled truck, and I waited for him to crash into the ditch, which is exactly what I had planned. I went over and picked it up, then turned it around so he could drive it back. We got into my mom's truck after lunch and started the long drive home. Within 2 minutes, my son and his grandfather were asleep in the back seat, and the truck went quiet. I looked at my mum and said, "Mom, you wouldn't believe what happened last night. I don't want to talk about it, but I'm glad it's over." She said I would probably believe it. We didn't talk again until we got back to our city, and I'm still not sure what happened. I write these stories in the hopes that someone will recognize parts of them and help me make sense of what has happened. If you know anything about any of this, please tell me. Be specific or even make a post about it here. Even though it's been a long time, I still don't understand everything that happened. And all I can do is tell you as much as I can about what happened. It happened that I fell in love with a woman I'd been seeing for a while. The woman and I are no longer together, and I'll leave out most of the details because that's not the point of this story. But here are a few things I think happened as a result of talking to a telepathic being. I started to be able to do remote viewing without any effort, and it was always right. Someone and I connected telepathically so I can feel their presence. I started to care deeply about people, kind animals, and all life. I think that I was in love with this person and had a bit of a crush on them, which led to some of this. She was weird, and I would run into her in strange places around my apartment complex. I cried late at night. When she was there, I could feel it. She sometimes took a friend's car and parked it in my parking lot in different places. I sometimes always knew how to find her. Even though I felt her, I didn't go. It was also strange that she never got mad at me for it. She was fine with me being there, but she didn't always come looking for me. The only time she did was when she was on my front porch and I woke up to find her there. It was a strange love story, and I said I would keep it short. I had already lost her love, which hurt me a lot, because I told her about the visits, but she also came to see me. Back then, everything was strange, and the whole world seemed to be singing to us. I'll never know how much the visitors had to do with these things, but I can't help but think they had a weird little hand in many of them. My contact with her and with them both ended in the same month in 2015. I'm trying to write about the whole experience as a whole, which is something I've never done before and haven't told many people about because the few people who know about it don't like to talk about it. We appreciate you reading this. It's a story that needs to be told, and I'd rather do it anonymously, since it won't help me get noticed, and people can just read it and think about it on their own. I can't be the only person who has been through these things who is reading this. I hope it makes sense to someone. I made up my mind to remember every detail of the next visit and pushed my resolve to get out of whatever hypnotic trance they had me in deep into my subconscious mind. I made it my only goal, more important than even the need to eat. That night, I wanted to stay awake again, but then I felt sleepy all of a sudden. I knew what was going to happen, so I secretly got ready to break free and take charge of the situation, even though I was partly aware of what I was doing. When the footsteps started, they were soft and padded toward my room. As they did, they knocked over another one of my art supplies that was dangerously balanced. As you went, I wasn't scared anymore, but I didn't move. When they got to the bed, I fell asleep right away. Again, I could feel myself coming back, but I had to fight through the fog of sleep to wake up. When I did, I saw that I was laying on my back and looking up at a dark metal ceiling. A person-like being stood next to me and looked at my torso. His eyes were big and slightly slanted, like mine, and he had long eyelashes and thick, dark eyebrows. He had a round head with a ridge on top, and his skin was the same color as that of a Caucasian person. He didn't have a nose, but instead had a long mouth that looked like a snout. It came out of his face like a rigid tube of flesh that got wider at the end, like the bell of a trumpet. His ears were shaped like elves' ears in fairy tales. They were pointed at the top. He looked at my face and saw that my eyes were in his. I could feel him poking around in my head and wondering if I'd come to again. My body was tied down with some kind of straps, and when I looked to my right, I saw another person who seemed to be in the same state as me. She was tied to a metal table that stuck out from the wall without any other support, and as I looked around, it seemed like we were in a round, dimly lit room. Several metal beds that looked like tables stuck out from the outside wall like spokes on a wheel. Each one was about 7.5 feet long and held people who seemed to be in a complete trance. I looked back at the strange being in front of me, who was wearing an unremarkable white lab coat, and sent my thoughts into his head. I told him, "Let me go," as his brows furrowed and he looked at me with concern. His brows furrowed even more, showing that he was very worried. His questioning of me got more and more serious, and I realized he had not understood what I had asked. I thought in words, in English, and he didn't understand my language. I looked deeper into his eyes and got a little mad at him. A skill I had learned as a child came back to me. It was something I had only done by myself. I've never talked about it or written about it. Now, I used my internal force, my spirit, to push out from my body with my mind and spirit, making a spherical pattern and a lot of pressure around me. The being took a few steps backwards and bumped into the woman who was lying down next to us at the table. His eyes had a look of surprise in them. He came up to me again and tried to look into my mind for the third time, but I wouldn't let him. As soon as I was aware of him in my thoughts, I took control of his mind and stopped him from being able to think. I forced his thoughts out of his head and put my own there, which was now just a loud, angry scream that was mixed in with this violent psychic episode. I thought he would take me off the table and let me stand up. This was my way of repeating my original demand, and I held him like this for about a minute. When I let him go, he couldn't move or think on his own. I looked back into his eyes, and my face showed that I was serious. He stumbled for a few steps and then ran out through a big opening that led into the room. I took another look around the room, trying to remember what it looked like. From what I could see, the room was round. It was dimly lit, but no one knew where the light was coming from. In the middle of the room stood a tall, cylindrical machine with what looked like mechanical controls. The walls, floor, ceiling and beds were all made of metal that wasn't painted and looked like stainless steel. I looked again at the woman whose bed was next to mine and closest to the door. She was moving her head around like someone who was sleeping and tossing and turning. It looked like she was dreaming to me. I called out to her, hoping to wake her up, and she looked at me once before turning back to the ceiling and going back to her dream-like state. In just a few more minutes, 2 large reptilian men entered the room and started walking quickly toward me, just like the first one. They were clothes that looked surprisingly normal. Like nurses in a hospital, they wore blue scrubs. However, they were not like nurses and their parents. They were at least 7 feet tall and very muscular. Their nails seemed to stick out of holes in their skin, and the color of their skin at the back of their pants looked like that of an alligator. Their heads were more like those of Komodo dragons, and they had scaly reptilian skin on their humanoid bodies. Their faces were too small to show much emotion, but I could tell they were angry with me as they quickly freed me from the table and let me stand. When I said something out loud, one of them hissed at me and shoved me out of the room. They walked on either side of me as I walked down a bright white hallway with no obvious light source. They would push me into a different hallway every now and then, so I kept walking and turned into the other hallways as I was pushed toward them. We kept going this way until I could no longer find my way. When did we get where we were going? A small room with just enough light. It has a simple metal table and 1 metal chair. In the back corner of the room, there was a second door, so there were 2 doors that both led out. I walked to the middle of the room and pulled out a metal chair that was surprisingly light. I sat down on it. We didn't have to wait long. I heard a voice in my head with a British accent. It was full of curiosity and sounded a little amused. "Well, this is surprising, isn't it?" The voice of the man spoke to my mind. "Certainly," I answered in a funny way. He said, "You've been very rude to that technician, and I'd like to ask you not to do it again." "Don't make me then," he answered in a polite way, of course. "I'm guessing you had to wait here for some reason, and I could tell you want to learn something. What would you like to find out? What do I have to do here? What are you doing here?" When I asked with those words, I felt like I was given a sign that would cut through the formality of thinking in words, as if I were being invited to do more real telepathic communication. Even though we didn't say words, my thoughts are written in English, and he needed to know the language in order for us to be able to communicate. The understandings were so clear that I could easily translate the conversation into English, but I want to use approximations and words to make it easier to explain here. Since then, I've started calling this person the Brain, since it was clear that he was in charge of this operation. From now on, I'll call him the Brain. During the rest of the story, he says, "We don't know how you decide what to do. We don't understand how you come to the conclusions you do, but it's clear that you do. We want to think and feel like you do about what you're going through." I said, "That's simple. All you had to do was ask." I wish it was that simple. We don't want to deal with so many of you because you are such a dirty creature. That's right. You're right. It's not always clear. Sometimes I'll offer you a deal. I will teach you more about how people think than anyone else ever has. But I want to learn and talk to people. I usually don't make deals. When you telepathically hurt one of your technicians, you don't usually have a person sitting in this chair. You are correct. I think that you'll help us a lot in our mission. What do you want to know? I have another part of this deal that must be kept if we want to keep going, which means that you can't take my son or anyone else I know unless they've given you their own permission. Don't be afraid. You don't remember, but we've already agreed on that. Thank you. I'm grateful. I want to know how things really are. I want to find out what's hidden from me and figure out what I went through. I may not usually understand. Men have been killed by such knowledge before. I don't think you can handle it. I can deal with small amounts at a time. We should make sure that we both learn the same amount. Each time the brain went, it was amused. You wouldn't get much for that. We didn't learn nearly as much from you as you hoped to from us. What I can get, I'll take. After all, I do want this to be a fair deal for both of us. You did the right thing. I will give you more than what you asked for because of this. But the information you get won't be too much for you to handle at this point. We start a short time of communicating even more deeply through telepathy. Both of our minds were open to each other. He could learn anything from what I knew, and I could do the same with what he knew. The two people talked for only about a minute and a half. Then I started to feel very tired. What do you look like? I finally asked to show you my name, which is to show you my visage. In his answer, he made a statement. By the way he looked, it was clear that his name. I can use my mind to find him anywhere. He seemed uncertain and worried. I gave him hope. I don't want to treat you like I treated your servant. I think your mind is stronger than mine, and it wouldn't be smart of me to try to do the same thing with you. He said yes. My thoughts told me to look at the top of the wall and part of the ceiling next to it, just above the door opposite the one I had come in. I saw him in a room diagonally above me, looking down at the wall. The wall and ceiling became clear for a moment. He seemed to be angry, even though he had felt warm while we were talking. I remember thinking that it was just his normal look, and that he probably didn't try to look like that. He told me that he had no idea I looked angry. The wall went back to being solid, and the room got darker. I opened my eyes in my bed and saw myself. I got to work late. I'm standing there in the round room, but this time I'm in the back behind the big rectangular structure, which I call a box, next to the bunk beds in the shadows. I'm with a friend whose name is Frank. If he knew I was telling this joke, he'd get it. We're both dressed and standing in a fairly dark place. We're both a little confused as we look at each other. At first, we didn't see anyone else, and as we looked at each other, we started to talk through our minds. Still, I said, there are other people here with us. Remember how we talked about how we shouldn't be afraid of them, even though they look scary? That's why they keep us in a trance. He gave a simple answer. Yes, I went on, but we have to do that now. We have to get over the fear we feel when we see them. For context, this is the only way they'll let us stay away. Imagine it for a moment. As a child growing up, you've probably seen all kinds of fluffy, cute, and even scary-looking animals in your mind. You learned what animals on Earth look like and how to spot the smartest ones, but you're still not ready for them. Even the ones that look like they could be from Earth are too big and smart to be from here. All of them are scary to look at because they are so strange. They are looking at you and they know more than you do. They could do anything they want to you or anyone else, and they are right there in front of you. It's creepy, and this is what I'm asking Frank to do to fight this answer, which is like seeing a mountain lion on a trail in the middle of nowhere. Nothing is as bad as being alone in the woods and coming across a big bear. Only what we have to fight to stay awake is worse. Then they show up. A boy and a girl stood just a few feet away from each other the whole time. They had just finished their lessons, and it was clear when they were introduced. Both of them didn't have clothes on because they were a mix of humans and reptiles, children, and they were looking at us as if we were there to teach them something. Or, if I'm being honest, like I had set up a playdate for my son and the other kids. This is how it felt. So, you might be wondering what these two kids who scared you looked like. First of all, most of them were green. It was a dark green colour that wasn't brown at all. And I have to say that I didn't do a good job of describing colours. They were pretty much the same colour as a common anomaly lizard, but their skin was smoother and they had scales on their faces. Their faces were green and had small scales around the edges. Well, this is strange, but I feel like I'm letting down these kids when I talk about them. Well, Let's just say that you could have guessed they were hybrids from the pink spots on their bodies that looked like human skin and the human-like features. By just taking a look at them, each one came up to us separately, with the female looking at me and the man coming to Frank. We had telepathic conversations with them, which was pretty cool for people. I wish I could have telepathic conversations with other people. I'm not going to tell anyone else what we talked about, but it was just simple stuff. They asked us a lot of questions about life on Earth, and they want to hear everything we have to say. Aside from the fact that they both said they were very lonely, that was probably the whole point of the visit. They were the most human things there because they were allowed to stay awake, and they wanted to talk to real people who were in a way their family. I can tell from most of these conversations that the visitors don't know how to deal with feelings, and that these poor kids mostly had to talk to people who were half asleep. This is why Frank and I were allowed to stay awake and talk to them like people. They needed to be understood by smart and emotional people like themselves in order to grow up, even though they look scary as hell. It's been hard to keep track of how long all of this has been going on. I don't know what they do to people, but they make it hard for people to remember things like this. I've been using my past girlfriends as points in time to help me put all of this in its proper place. And if it weren't for these wonderful women, I wouldn't know how many of these things fit together in time. Before I went to my brother's house and before I used the memory control device, the following things happened. Strange things were happening, and it was hard to keep it to myself. I didn't know the word for it at the time, but it certainly fits. I was having a very strange time. It's hard to explain how strange things got. I was having a hard time because I was trying to keep my experience from most of the people I knew. You may have noticed that my relationship with my mother has always been tense. She is the meanest person I know, and I often say that growing up with her was like being raised by the Emperor from Star Wars. The woman is pretty much the definition of evil, but I love her because she's my only mum. Anyway, one day, my son, his girlfriend, and I were sitting on the back patio of a restaurant, and I just couldn't hold back any longer. The boy was playing about 20 feet away in a sandbox, which kept him busy enough that he couldn't hear what we were saying. Just now I said it. "Mum, I think aliens are taking me away." She laughed, but it didn't take her long to look over and see how sad I was. She wasn't making me laugh. I was very sad. I'll try to remember what each of us said, and I'll do my best to write it down. But the language isn't as good. "Mom, I'm not joking. It's giving me too much trouble. I'm not sure how to handle it. I can't tell anyone, especially not my son. I'm not losing my mind. This is going on. I have no idea why I'm telling you. I apologize. It has changed the way I see the world and my life. Everything." And that's when she also decides to tell me. Her boyfriend is already there, staring at her in shock and disbelief. But what she said next surprised both of us. I've never told this story to anyone, but I think now is a good time to say it, she started. "It was December, and you were 9 months along. Your dad and I were sitting on the front porch and watching the sun go down. I was pregnant and the wife of a preacher, so I didn't do drugs, smoke cigarettes, or even drink tea. I always remember this line, which is a direct quote. We were sitting there and looking in different directions, and for miles all we could see were cow pastures. I saw another sun in the sky, and it wasn't where it should have been. I just looked the other way to see the sunset, but there was another ball of light in the sky over there. It wasn't too bright, so I knew it wasn't the sun just by looking at it. So I'm looking at this thing with awe and wonder. What is that? And it starts to move. It comes down and moves behind a row of trees, and I feel like it's watching me. I'm so shocked that I can't even talk, and the whole thing only lasts about a minute. It starts to move back and forth behind the trees, and I can see it shining through. It was a small row of trees, not a forest, and I could see the ball of light moving back and forth behind them as it watched me. It gave me the creeps. I finally come to my senses and turn my head toward your father, who is looking in the opposite direction. I put my hand on his shoulder and am about to tell him to look, but I never take my eyes off of that thing. It went straight up into the sky. It went away without making a sound. I turn around to look at my dad, but he's still just staring off into the sunset. "Did you notice?" I asked him, but he didn't understand what I meant. He missed everything. I didn't want to tell anyone because everyone thought I was perfect and they would have thought I was crazy or on drugs. I've never even thought about this memory before today. Well, Mom, I told you they were keeping an eye on you. After that, we quickly changed the subject and didn't talk about it again. It was awkward to talk about it with her. I thought she would get really angry because that's how she's reacted to almost everything my whole life. I didn't think she would say the things she did. Taking what I've learned in the past few years into account, I think the visitors have been around since before I was born. I've always thought of this event as the spectacular final visit, which is what I've called it here. I'm still trying to figure out what happened, which is the main reason I came here to talk about my life. I'm going to tell you about 2 things that happened close together in time. My next post here will be my last. In it, I'll share some of what I've learned, say what I think about it all, and make some guesses. For now, I just want to say that I'm glad this story is almost over. My son went to stay with his mother. She was staying in motels at the time, but that's a whole different story. And I was used to being by myself for a week. When I got home from work in late spring 2015, there was a beautiful thunderstorm in the sky. It was a great show. The lightning went in all directions in a spider web-like pattern, and there were both cold and warm air currents moving along the ground. Even though it wasn't raining, I stood there and watched it. An airplane flew by and I thought, who the hell would fly a plane in this weather? I was tempted to ignore it and look in a different direction, but something about the plane seemed strange. It had one engine and a propeller up front, but it wasn't a 3D. The propeller didn't move, and it was flat, like a painting. I kept looking at it and realized that it wasn't flying at all. It moved, but it didn't fly. It moved very slowly, and as I looked more closely, I saw that the flat image was on top of something else. Behind the plane, I could just barely see a diamond-shaped object that bent the light in a way that reminded me of the movie Predator, in which the character's armor makes him hard to see. It wasn't shaped like a diamond, which is how people usually describe things. It looked like a cut diamond from the side. Think of the outline of the symbol on Superman's chest. This boat looked like that. I looked at it until it moved to the north and out of sight. I had seen so many strange things by this time that it didn't really surprise me. I just went about my day and night, and things were pretty normal. They were fine until the last time they went. When I got home from work later that week, the apartment was empty. At first, I just stood in my living room and thought about what I was going to do that night. I was still lost in thought when I went into my bedroom. As I stared blankly at the back wall of my room, I saw something that looked like a white mist near the ceiling. I turned to look at it, but as I did, it moved away and behind me. Great. I thought that my eyesight was getting worse. I moved around and changed my clothes before going into the living room. Still thinking to myself, I'm standing there with my back to the front door and my eyes turned toward the kitchen. It comes out right in front of me, about 4 feet off the ground, from my bedroom door. It moves across the space between my living room and kitchen, looking like a cloud of smoke that won't go away. It was almost 2 feet long and a foot high, and it looked like a cigarette drag. It was dimly lit and never lost its shape. It just floated in front of me from my dark and empty bedroom to my son's dark and empty bedroom. As I watch it move, I can't believe it. I didn't know what to do at all. I just have to stand there. Then I hear something fall over in my son's room. Something is moving around in there like a clumsy oaf, knocking things over. I shout to everyone in the room from where I stand. This is why people are scared of you. You just can't go around hiding in the dark, knocking things over in people's houses uninvited. It's creepy. This thing, whatever it was, knocks over some toys near my son's nightstand, and I'm starting to think it is a bumbling idiot. I'm getting annoyed with it now, but I'm also scared. I go to the bedroom and look into the door. The room was dark, but a little light came in from above and behind me where my dining room light shone, and right there on the wall in front of me was a 9 feet tall man-shaped shadow. My shadow was on the ground due to the light source, but this thing was standing there. Its head was huge and bulbous, and it was just a big scary shadow. It didn't move when I moved, it moved. When I didn't move, it wasn't my shadow. It was something else. At this point I'm scared. I walked back to the same spot in my living room where I had stood and started talking toward the darkened bedroom. You see what I mean? A big shadow guy. Really? How am I not supposed to be scared? This is what I'm talking about. You guys can't just do this and expect people not to be frightened. I'm going to try and not be scared. You've got to come out of there. You come out of here and we can talk or do the telepathy thing if you want. I'll try not to be scared, I promise." As I'm speaking the last sentence, an orange ball of light floats out of my son's bedroom about the same distance from the floor. It looks like a little sun about the size of a golf ball. It's only mildly glowing, like how the sun looks through the lens of a satellite. I watch it float over one of my couches right past me and through the large glass patio doors behind me. It went to the vertical blinds as if they weren't even there on the other side of the glass outside. I hear a loud thump and the sound of something scrambling down the stairs as if it's running. For its life, 5. I'm too stunned to move for about a second or two. Then I think this is it. I'm finally going to see one of those little grey bastards while I'm completely away. I rushed to the door and peeked outside, and shredding away from my stairs is a large, mostly grey male calico cat. At this point, I don't really know if it's a cat or something else in disguise, and it was really large for a house cat. He's just trotting away casually, and I'm a little upset with it now. "Hey," I yell at him. He looks over his shoulder at me as if he's completely unimpressed, and then just turns back and keeps walking away. I stand on my porch a lot and knew all of the local cats. I'd seen all of them 100 times, and I didn't recognize that cat at all. So after all of this, I did what most people do. I needed a drink, and so I went to the local pub and got smashed. That was the only way I was going to sleep that night after seeing everything that I had. That's everything, folks. There are a few details and experiences, I've admitted, but they're unimportant. No one has ever heard all this before,